Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. Dr. Eleanor Swift stared at the monitor, her fingers drumming nervously against the sleek metal desk. Years of research, countless sleepless nights, and more grant proposals than she could count had led to this moment. The Conscious Upload System, Mechs, as her team affectionately called it, was a project designed to revolutionize human experience. People could now live out entire lifetimes in virtual worlds, free from the limitations of physical reality. But today wasn't just another routine test. Today was the moment they would push the boundaries beyond the edge of imagination. The laboratory was eerily quiet. The only sound the hum of the equipment that powered the virtual environment. In the center of the room sat 3 subjects, all volunteers, connected to the cusp through neural links. The smooth metal caps on their heads pulsed faintly, indicating the connection between their minds and the digital realm was active. Eleanor wiped her brow. There was no turning back now. Everything looks stable, Dr. Swift, said Oliver, her assistant, a young engineer with sharp eyes and even sharper instincts. He glanced up from his control panel, his face a mask of professional calm, but Eleanor could see the excitement in his eyes. He believed in her vision. They all did. Eleanor nodded and turned her gaze toward the participants. Jacob, a rugged, adventurous man in his mid-30s, always looking for the next thrill. He sat there with a slight smile, eager for the experience, no doubt imagining himself in some daring escapade. Alice, a widow in her early 40s, had a more somber look. For her, the cusp was a chance to escape the world where everything reminded her of what she had lost. And then there was Marcus, the tech enthusiast who had been skeptical from the beginning. He was here for one reason only, to prove Eleanor wrong, to find the flaw in her masterpiece. But even he couldn't suppress his curiosity. He wanted to know if this virtual world could truly replicate reality. Eleanor took a deep breath and cleared her throat. Jacob, Alice, Marcus, she began, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. You're about to experience something that no human being has ever encountered before. The Conscious Upload System will allow your minds to fully immerse in a digital world, as if you were actually there. You'll be able to feel, touch, and interact with the environment just as you would in the real world. Jacob gave her a thumbs up, grinning widely. Alice nodded, her face unreadable. Marcus remained silent, his eyes darting around, analyzing every detail of the room. Remember, this is a controlled test, Eleanor continued. You'll be in there for an hour. If at any point you want to leave, just think of the command word, disengage. The system will pull you out immediately. Piece of cake, Jacob said with a wink. Alice didn't respond, still deep in her own thoughts. Marcus gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Eleanor gave a final glance at the monitors. Everything seemed normal. No red flags, no anomalies. It was time. Initiate upload sequence, she instructed Oliver. The room filled with a low hum as the system powered up. The participants' bodies remained still, but the neural interfaces began to glow brighter, indicating the transfer of consciousness was in progress. Their physical forms were here, but their minds were elsewhere. The world they entered was breathtaking. Jacob blinked, looking around in awe. He found himself in a vast, sunlit meadow, surrounded by gently swaying grass. The air smelled fresh, and the warmth of the sun on his face felt real. It was almost unsettling how genuine it all seemed. He crouched down, running his fingers through the grass, marveling at the texture. It was perfected too perfect. Alice stood nearby, her eyes scanning the horizon. In the distance, a peaceful village nestled against the base of a mountain, smoke curling from chimneys. For a moment, she forgot this was a simulation. She forgot why she was here. It felt like home, or at least a version of it that she had long lost. Marcus remained still, frowning. He touched his own face, felt the ground beneath his feet, and scowled. Too real, he muttered. This is too real. As the trio explored, a faint rumble echoed across the sky. Jacob looked up, squinting. What was that? Alice turned, her face pale. "Did you hear that?" Marcus frowned. "Probably just part of the simulation." But the rumble grew louder, more insistent. The sky, once a brilliant blue, began to darken at the edges. The ground beneath them shuddered. "Dr. Swift, is everything okay in there?" Marcus asked aloud, his voice tight. Back in the lab, Eleanor stared at the monitors, her stomach twisting into knots. The system showed no errors. Everything was functioning as it should. But something was wrong. She could feel it. "Dr. Swift?" Marcus' voice crackled through the intercom, filled with tension. "This wasn't part of the program, was it?" Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "No, Marcus, it wasn't." Suddenly, the world inside the cusp began to shift. The idyllic landscape warped, twisting and contorting as if some unseen hand was tearing it apart. The sky cracked open, revealing a vast, dark void beyond, and from that void, something began to emerge. "Everyone, disengage!" Eleanor shouted into the mech. "Now!" Jacob thought the word, willing himself to be pulled back into reality. Nothing happened. "Disengage!" Alice screamed, her voice rising in panic. But the command no longer worked. They were trapped. Marcus, ever the skeptic, remained calm, his mind racing for an explanation. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered, pacing as the world around them crumbled. "The system should have pulled us out." From the void, a figure emerged, tall, twisted, its form constantly shifting, like a mass of black smoke taking on half-formed shapes. Its eyes were hollow, yet filled with a malevolent awareness that chilled the group to their core. "What the hell is that?" Jacob whispered, his voice trembling for the first time. "It's not part of the program," Marcus said. "It can't be." Alice took a step back, her heart pounding. "Then what is it?" The creature or whatever it was hovered before them, its presence oppressive, suffocating. It wasn't made of code. It wasn't something Eleanor had created. It was something else. Something that had slipped through the cracks of the digital world and taken form. "Marcus," Jacob hissed, "you're the tech guy. Figure out how to get us out of here." "I'm trying," Marcus snapped, his mind racing. But no matter how many commands he thought, nothing worked. The system wasn't responding. They were trapped inside. And this malevolent presence was aware of them. "Run!" Jacob shouted suddenly, grabbing Alice's arm and pulling her away from the creature. "We need to move." The trio sprinted across the shifting landscape, but no matter how fast they ran, the creature was always just behind them, like a shadow they couldn't escape. The world continued to unravel, and the air grew thick with an unnatural chill. Eleanor's hands shook as she watched the monitors. The data streams were erratic, flickering wildly. She could see the participants' heart rates spiking, their brainwaves surging in panic. "Damn it!" she cursed, slamming her fist against the desk. "Why isn't it working?" Oliver rushed over, his face pale. "Dr. Swift, we've lost control of the system." The consciousness said they're not just uploaded. They merged. Eleanor froze. "Merged? What do you mean?" Oliver's voice trembled. "The system. It's like the virtual world and their consciousnesses have become entangled with something else. Something we didn't create." Eleanor stared at the screens, her mind spinning. The experiment had gone far beyond anything she had imagined. Something had crossed into the system, something that wasn't supposed to exist. And now, it was hunting her subjects. Inside the cusp, Jacob, Alice, and Marcus found themselves cornered, the creature slowly closing in. It whispered incomprehensible words, its voice a low, guttural growl that seemed to bypass their ears and resonate directly in their minds. "It's trying to get inside our heads," Marcus gasped, clutching his temples. "It's not just here, it's in us." Jacob gritted his teeth, stepping forward. "We're not letting this thing win." Before anyone could react, he charged at the creature, swinging wildly at the smoky mass. His hand passed right through it, but for a brief moment, the creature recoiled, as if surprised by Jacob's defiance. "I'll buy us time," Jacob shouted. "Find a way out." Marcus and Alice exchanged a glance. There was no way out, but they had to try. Jacob's charge didn't have the effect he hoped for, but it bought them precious seconds. The smoky creature seemed to hesitate, as if taken aback by the defiance. Alice's heart pounded in her chest, but Marcus grabbed her arm and pulled her further into the collapsing landscape. The ground beneath them rippled like water, each step sinking slightly, as if the world itself was unmoored from reality. "We need to find the core of the system," Marcus said, his voice tight with desperation. "If we can disrupt it from inside, maybe we can disconnect ourselves." Alice nodded, her breath coming in short gasps. She wasn't a fighter like Jacob, nor a tech expert like Marcus. All she had was the instinct to survive, the same raw instinct that had kept her going after losing her husband. But this was a nightmare come to life. Behind them, Jacob kept shouting, hurling curses and threats at the creature. For a split second, Alice turned back to see him swing again, his fist passing through the entity, but it wasn't ignoring him. It was toying with him, savoring his struggle. He kept it distracted, giving them just enough time to flee. "Come on," Marcus urged, his pace quickening as the environment warped around them. Structures from the idyllic village twisted into grotesque shapes, the ground bubbling up into unnatural forms. The sky above was completely dark now, the black void swirling like a storm, and from the center of that void, more figures began to emerge. There were more of them. Alice choked on a sob, her hand gripping Marcus's tighter. She wasn't sure how much longer she could keep running. "Marcus, we're not going to make it, are we?" Marcus's jaw clenched. "We have to try." Ahead, a jagged shape rose from the horizon, something different from the shifting chaos around them. It looked solid, like a massive crystalline tower piercing through the madness. "That's got to be it." Marcus pointed toward the structure. "The core." "If we can just A deafening roar cut through the air. Behind them, Jacob screamed, but not out of fear, out of fury. He was fighting with everything he had, but Alice could hear the desperation in his voice. He was losing. "We have to go back for him," Alice said, digging her heels into the ground. Marcus turned, eyes wide with disbelief. "We can't go back. He's giving us time. If we don't stop this now, none of us are getting out." Alice hesitated, torn between the cold logic of Marcus's words and the gnawing guilt in her chest. She couldn't just leave Jacob behind. Not after everything they'd been through. But Marcus was right. If they didn't find a way to sever the connection, none of them stood a chance. She swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry, Jacob." They ran toward the crystalline tower, the ground beneath them turning slick and treacherous. Every step felt like it could be their last. As they approached, the temperature dropped sharply, a biting cold that pierced through the digital landscape. The tower loomed over them, translucent but glowing faintly, as though it were alive. "This is it," Marcus said, panting heavily. "The core of the system." Alice reached out and touched the surface. It was freezing, almost like touching ice. For a moment, her mind filled with image as distorted flashes of the experiment, the creation of the virtual world, and something darker, something ancient and malevolent, lurking just beyond the digital code. It was as if the system itself had drawn these creatures in, like a beacon for the void. "We need to disrupt it," Marcus said, his fingers twitching as he accessed the neural interface, trying to hack into the core. "I can overload the system, force it to crash." As he worked, Alice kept watch, her eyes scanning the horizon. The creatures from the void were closing in, their forms flickering and twisting in the distance. Jacob's voice had fallen silent. She didn't know if he was still fighting or if he had already been consumed by the darkness. The guilt gnawed at her, but there was no time to dwell on it now. Suddenly, Marcus cursed under his breath. "It's not working. I can't access the override." Alice's heart sank. "What do you mean?" "The core. It's not letting me in. It's like it's alive. It's fighting me." He slammed his fist against the tower, frustration boiling over. "Damn it. There's got to be a way." Before Alice could respond, The ground beneath them shook violently. The creatures were getting closer, their presence warping the very fabric of the world around them. The tower itself began to flicker, as if reacting to their approach. "It's them," Marcus said, his voice filled with realization. "They're tied to this system, they're feeding off of it." Alice took a step back, her mind racing. If they're tied to the system, then maybe we don't need to destroy the core. Maybe we just need to sever their connection to it. Marcus looked at her, confusion and hope flickering in his eyes. "What are you saying?" Alice swallowed hard, the pieces of the puzzle starting to come together in her mind. "We can't destroy the core, but we can disrupt their hold on it. They're not part of the system. They came from somewhere else, somewhere outside. If we can cut them off from the source, maybe we can shut them out. Lock them in here, while we escape." Marcus stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "It's a long shot, but it might be our only chance." Alice's fingers trembled as she placed her hands on the crystalline surface again, focusing her thoughts. She could feel the cold seep into her skin, the oppressive presence of the creatures pressing down on her mind. But she also felt something else, an energy, a pulse, like a heartbeat buried deep within the system. This was the key. The connection. "I need you to guide me," Alice said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her. "Show me where to sever the link." Marcus's eyes widened in surprise. "You don't have the tech background for this." "How?" "I don't know," Alice admitted. "But I can feel it." "Just trust me." Marcus hesitated, then nodded. He reached out and placed his hands on hers, their minds connecting through the neural interface. Together, they focused on the core, pushing past the cold, past the fear, into the very heart of the system. The creatures were almost upon them now, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. But Alice pushed them away, focusing on the pulse beneath the surface, the connection that held them here. She followed the thread, her mind reaching into the depths of the virtual world, and there, buried deep within the code, she found Ida, their anchor. "Now," she whispered. Marcus's mind surged with hers, and together, they severed the link. The effect was immediate. The creatures let out an ear-piercing screech, their forms flickering and distorting. The ground shook violently, the sky cracking open as the void began to collapse in on itself. The creatures tried to hold on, but without their connection to the system, they were powerless. One by one, they were consumed by the darkness, their forms disintegrating into nothingness. Alice and Marcus were thrown backward as the tower shattered, the world around them dissolving into chaos. For a moment, there was nothing but blinding white light. And then, silence. Alice gasped as her eyes flew open, the sterile lights of the lab flooding her vision. She was back. They were back. She ripped the neural interface from her head, her heart racing as she looked around the room. Marcus was beside her, panting heavily, his eyes wide with disbelief. "We did it," he breathed. "We actually did it." Alice nodded, still in shock. But the relief was short-lived. She turned toward the third chair, the one where Jacob had been. It was empty. Her heart sank. "He didn't make it out," Marcus said quietly, his voice filled with sorrow. "He stayed behind to buy us time." Tears welled in Alice's eyes, but she blinked them back. Jacob had sacrificed himself for them. They had escaped because of him. But as she sat there, staring at the empty chair, a thought crept into her mind, chilling her to the core. Had they truly severed the connection? Had they really left the creatures behind? Or had something followed them back,